In the previous episode of Surviving in the Game as a Barbarian, the main character, a veteran gamer, suddenly wakes up to find himself transformed into a barbarian inside the very game he has been grinding for over 10 years. With no magic, no special skills, only brute strength and a bit of survival experience, he is forced to struggle through fierce battles just to stay alive. Along the way, he meets a mysterious elf girl, someone who not only saves him multiple times but also holds crucial information about this world. After overcoming countless challenges on the first floor, the two finally stand before a massive gate, the only path to the second floor, where greater dangers and the real secrets are just beginning. And now, let's step into the next chapter of this brutal survival journey in part 2. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, make sure to check it out in the comment section of this video so you can fully enjoy the story. The system's chime rang out in John's ears. You have reached floor 2, Goblin Forest. A heartbeat later, he and Erwin were plummeting through the air. Hey, you alright up there? Erwin's voice carried over the rush of wind. John's body hit the ground with a jolt, leaving him groaning. So this is what it feels like to go through a teleportation gate. He pushed himself up and muttered, "Yeah, I'm fine. Feels like I was swallowed whole by a giant frog sitting at the bottom of a well, and then spat out for fun." Erwin landed beside him as if gravity had politely asked her to. She was grinning from ear to ear. That was amazing. I've never fallen into a floor like that before. No one told me the teleport would work that way. John frowned, half annoyed, half impressed. She stuck the landing perfectly, while he was still shaking dirt out of his ears. Manji folk must be born with this kind of agility, he thought with a hint of envy. He scanned the surroundings first, thick shadows, towering trees, and the faint glow of starlight overhead. Let's take a quick look around. I'm guessing this is the northern sector of the Goblin Forest. Just behind them, the shimmering oval of the teleport gate still hung in the air, ready to send them back to floor 1 at any moment. John stretched his senses outward, no signs of life within 50 meters. Erwin tilted her head back, eyes wide as she took in the night sky. Wow. I can see so clearly with the stars out. I didn't think the maze would have a sky like this. Enjoy it while you can, John said. This place is still part of the labyrinth. She glanced at him, curiosity sparking. So, is this really floor 2? I've never heard of it being a forest before. Maybe there's a different floor 2 somewhere? John nodded slightly. There are 4 gates on the first floor. Each one leads to a completely different region. North brings you here, to the Goblin Forest. East takes you to the Beast's Den. West goes to the Deadlands. And south, he paused for effect, leads to the Blackstone Mountains. Erwin's eyes lit up. And no matter which one we pick, all of them eventually lead to floor 3? That's right, John said, tightening his grip on his weapon. But first, we survived this place. John pushed himself up with a resigned sigh. Alright, but what now? You wouldn't happen to know the way back to the city from here, would you? Erwin tapped her chin, trying to remember. If I recall correctly, we get sent back automatically once the labyrinth closes, right? That's right. Floor 1 stays open for 168 hours, floor 2 for 240. Once the timer runs out, the labyrinth spits every adventurer back into the city whether they like it or not. And the Crystal Alliance won't be coming here, they can barely cooperate with each other, let alone explore this place together. John adjusted the straps on his gear. Then we'll stay on floor 2 until the last stretch of the 168 hours, then head back to floor 1. But we can't just sit around guarding the teleport gate the whole time, Erwin pointed out. A small grin tugged at John's mouth. Exactly. So, let's go exploring. Erwin gave an approving nod. Lead the way? No, John said, slinging his pack over his shoulder. You're leading. I'll follow. Fine by me, Erwin replied with a playful smirk. They stepped into the depths of the Goblin Forest, the thick canopy swallowing up most of the starlight. The air was heavy with damp earth and the scent of old wood. For John, the atmosphere was suffocating. For Erwin, it was almost nostalgic. "You know," she said, her voice light, "I actually like it here. Even though I'm well aware there are monsters lurking about, something about this place reminds me of an old elven shrine." John raised an eyebrow. "A shrine with man-eating goblins. Charming. Watch your step," she warned. "There are traps here. Just follow my lead." Her gaze shifted toward the distance. "There's one right there. See it?" John squinted. "Nope. Looks like a pile of leaves to me." "Exactly," she said with a sly smile. She picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the spot. The instant it landed, a snapping mechanism shot up from the ground, metal jaws slamming shut where someone's leg could have been. John stared at it for a moment, then muttered, "Noted. I'll be walking exactly where you walk from now on." John couldn't help but think, so this is what elven detection skills look like. Erwin's eyes lit up with excitement. "Well, what do you think? Impressive, right?" He hesitated. "I think you're really good at throwing rocks." Her smile faltered. "That's it? Finding traps is part of your job, isn't it? Don't get all worked up over something so minor. You're already a proper adventurer." Hearing that, Erwin blushed slightly, rubbing the back of her neck. "All right, a proper adventurer it is." John smirked inwardly. She's surprisingly easy to manipulate. Still, something felt off. "It's strange though. There are traps here, but I'm not sensing any goblins nearby." "That's normal," John replied. "Unlike floor 1, finding a trap here doesn't mean a goblin is waiting to gut you. The traps on floor 2 are more like part of the landscape." "Landscape, huh? That's a pretty murderous landscape." "Enough talking. Eyes forward." "Fine," she said, straightening up. "This area is called the Goblin Forest in the game version," John explained. "Aside from the traps, there's another thing you should know. The goblins here travel in groups of 12, sometimes with elite units like warriors or archers. The deeper we go, the more elites we'll meet, and possibly some high-tier monsters as well." Erwin tilted her head. 12 goblins at once? Sounds like a nightmare." John shrugged. "Think of it as an all-you-can-fight buffet." She grinned. "Then I'm definitely going B." That didn't really matter, since their goal for now was just to scout the area around the portal. After walking for a while, John spoke up. "We'll clear out every trap in the vicinity and then slowly expand our search radius. If things get hairy, we'll run straight back to floor 1. Last thing we need is to step on a trap while we're retreating." They worked methodically, tossing rocks to trigger the hidden snares scattered around. When Erwin finished, she couldn't contain her excitement. "I did great, didn't I? Top-tier work, worthy of a Reincarnated adventurer." John allowed himself a faint smile, but before he could answer, Erwin's expression shifted to something far more serious. "We've got company. A goblin patrol." "How many?" "Not sure. More than 10. I'd say they're about 50 meters away." It seemed the goblins hadn't spotted them yet. "What's the plan?" she whispered. "We take them down." "How close can you get without being noticed?" "If it's me, about 30 meters, she replied without hesitation. "Then we'll do it your way." Erwin crept forward, moving like a shadow over the grass. Not a single blade rustled. So this is what elven grace looks like, John thought. Soon, she had eyes on the enemy, an entire cluster of goblins moving together. She silently signaled for him to hold position, then raised her bow. The string hummed as she drew it back, and a heartbeat later, an arrow sailed toward its mark. From this distance, John couldn't hear the impact, but he saw one goblin jerk and collapse. His sharp instincts prickled. Something wasn't right. "Fall back, Erwin." She didn't argue. "On it." Without hesitation, Jan Den charged straight into the goblin horde. Floor 2 was already proving to be a whole different beast, goblins appeared in packs nearly 3 times larger than on floor 1, and some of them wore the heavy armor of goblin warriors. Intimidating for sure, but instead of fear, something else surged inside him. The heart of a warrior pounded in his chest, loud and steady, drowning out any thought of retreat. With a fierce roar, he crashed into their ranks, sending goblins sprawling. His strikes came heavy and relentless, each blow tearing through their defenses. 2 tried to flank him from either side, but he moved like a force of nature, cutting them down before they could land a hit. Then, a sudden blur at the edge of his vision, a goblin lunging from behind. Instinct saved him. He twisted away just in time, the blade grazing his arm instead of finding his heart. That was too close. A second slower and I'd be done for. The goblins didn't let up, pressing forward without giving him a moment to breathe. Fighting more than 5 at once was enough to push even an experienced adventurer to the edge. But he wasn't alone. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Erwin already in position, bowstring drawn, her arrow slicing through the air with deadly precision. That was all the opening he needed. He let out a battle cry that echoed through the trees. "Come on then, you filthy beasts." The goblins took the bait, rushing in only to be cut down in a storm of steel and arrows. Minutes later, silence returned to the forest. The last goblin warrior fell, and the system's familiar notification chimed in his mind: "You have defeated a goblin warrior." Experience gained. Loot acquired, 11 magic crystals. Jan Den grinned as he scooped up the shimmering shards. Compared to the full day's work it took to gather 44 crystals on floor 1, this was a windfall. "Shame we can't strip them for weapons or armor," he muttered. The bodies had already dissolved into the ether, taking their gear with them. Erwin's eyes lit up at the sight of the haul. Even if they're all 9th rank crystals, the ones from a swordsman fetch a higher price. He handed her 2 without hesitation. "A little bonus for good shooting." Her smile was genuine. "Thank you, sir. Come on. We move." "Yes." With the spoils secured, they pushed deeper into the forest, both eager to see just how much they could earn before the next 4 days were up. By the time they had pushed more than 3 kilometers from the portal, goblin encounters had become almost clockwork. Every 5 minutes, another pack emerged from the shadows. And each time, the goblins seemed better equipped. This time, a bowman stood among them. "Look at that one," Jan Den muttered, eyes narrowing. "He's fading away." "Invisibility magic," Erwin replied, her bow already in hand. "I'll handle it. Just keep him busy." Jan Den surged forward, forcing the melee fighters to focus on him while Erwin loosed arrows from the rear. The goblin archers were troublesome. Unlike their sword-wielding kin, they stayed back and picked shots with the patience of wolves watching prey. One arrow whistled through the air toward Jan Den's chest. His instinct screamed before his eyes caught it. He twisted hard, feeling the wind of its passing. The hidden archer froze when their cover was blown, panic flashing across its face. Jan Den's grip tightened around his warhammer. The goblin tried to retreat, but a single swing sent it flying into the air before it vanished into motes of light. Goblin archer defeated. Experience gained. They fought like that for hours, until fatigue finally pressed down on both of them. Jan Den wiped sweat from his brow. "We've been at this for, what, 15 hours? "Something like that," Erwin replied, looking pale but still steady. "If you want, you can sleep first," he offered. Her eyes brightened instantly. "Really? What about a sleeping bag and blanket?" "I'll set them up." They stashed their gear in a sheltered corner of the forest. Erwin was asleep within moments, this time breathing softly instead of the perfectly silent rest she'd kept before. Maybe she finally feels safe, Jan Den thought, though he stayed alert. Hunting here had been far more profitable than on floor 1, but venturing farther meant crossing paths with other adventurers, most in groups of 3 or more, and sometimes from entirely different races. He had no plans to interact with them, but even passing glances were enough to raise his guard. Other adventurers can be far more dangerous than goblins. He glanced at Erwin again. She was fast asleep, completely defenseless. and far too beautiful for his peace of mind. He muttered the thought under his breath, loud enough for her to stir. Her eyes opened slowly. I'm that beautiful, huh? Sleep, he grumbled, looking away. Didn't you just snore a second ago? She smiled faintly, then drifted back off. Jan Den sighed. She's nothing like the else I've known. The days blurred together, fighting, tracking, resting. By the fourth day, their movements were automatic. Fifth day, more of the same. Sixth day, they pushed on despite aching muscles. When the seventh day dawned, both of them were utterly exhausted. At last, the entrance to the labyrinth came into view. A quick glance at the timer told them there were just 2 hours and 47 minutes left before the first floor would seal itself off. Erwin trudged forward, her steps heavy, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm exhausted. I'm going straight to bed the moment we get back. Jan Den could relate, though he was better at hiding it. All right. Let's head back. Best to return a little early. Before they could take more than a dozen steps, his eyes caught something ahead. A trap, Erwin warned, her gaze sharp. Be careful. And there are new ones. The goblins must have respawned. I see a group at 1 o'clock, 70 meters. 8 regulars, 2 archers, and 2 warriors. Jan Den's lips curved into a grin. We're taking them. The goblins were huddled together, snarling and restless. They didn't notice the shadow of a giant closing in until it was too late. Jan Den crashed into their ranks like a living avalanche, the sheer size of him making even these vicious creatures take an involuntary step back. His roar shook the air, and then his warhammer began to swing. Erwin handled the archers, Jan Den focused on the warriors. One by one, he cut through them with ruthless efficiency. After so many battles, his movements were instinctive, fast, decisive, almost overwhelming. Feels like I've grown another set of eyes and hands, he thought. Erwin had improved too. She no longer hesitated, she chose her targets with precision. She'd warned him about 2 archers, yet not a single arrow had come his way. The fight ended quicker than expected. Jan Den gave her a thumbs up. Well done. Her smile lit up instantly, but he added, next time, tell me the moment you take down the last archer. I don't want to keep worrying about them mid-fight. Sorry, she said, scratching her cheek. I wasn't sure if the last one was hit. That's the problem. Uncertain intel is more dangerous than none. She nodded seriously. Jan Den could see it, she'd grown in just a few days, and pride stirred in his chest. Then Erwin pointed toward one of the fallen goblins. Look at that. Over there. From the corpse, a faint blue light drifted upward, shimmering like mist. Jan Den's eyes narrowed. That's an essence. The essence of a goblin archer. In a place like this? Erwin stared at the faint blue glow. Jan Den's voice dropped into the tone of someone explaining a rare treasure. That's an essence. Part of the dungeon and stone skill system. Each one grants both an active and a passive ability, their properties changing depending on the creature it came from. You can only claim 1 per level. It's so valuable that adventurers consider it worth more than gold itself. But there's a catch, your body can only absorb a limited number, and the kind you get can shape your future as an adventurer. He eyed it suspiciously. The drop rate was so low, it was almost mythical. I never expected to see one here, feels too lucky to be good. They hesitated. Erwin tilted her head. If you eat it, will you turn into a goblin? Jan Den snorted. No. You'd just gain part of a goblin's ability. Remember that man who hunted us on the first floor? He had a main wolf essence and tracked us by scent. Would I want that? Erwin muttered. Maybe not, but I'll take it if you don't want it. Jan Den almost laughed. She's getting bolder. But the truth was, he already knew which essences he needed, and wasting one on the wrong type would cost him dearly. A goblin archer's essence was of little use to a warrior like him. Fine, Owen, he said at last. You can have it, if you promise me something. I'll tell you when we reach the first floor. He stopped. Two figures had appeared from the shadows, their killing intent heavy in the air. Don't move, Jan Den warned under his breath. What's your problem? The elf snapped. Erwin stepped forward defensively. We were just hunting. Jan Den could already read the situation, they'd been too lucky, and now trouble had arrived. Erwin. Stand down. Huh? He shoved her aside and seized the essence. The moment it touched Erwin's lips, a blinding light flared, forcing the newcomers to shield their eyes. What the? She ate it? That was ours. Erwin staggered to her feet, clearly unsettled by the power now coursing through her. Thanks. Jan Den stepped toward the pair, his voice low and dangerous. If you want to fight, then come. We may be outnumbered, but the more desperate the odds, the harder I hit. Back down now, or walk away knowing you feared us. For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. Then the two backed off, muttering curses, before disappearing into the trees. Jan Den and Erwin wasted no time, sprinting through the undergrowth, their boots pounding against the forest floor. Only when the field opened ahead did Erwin glance back. We lost them, right? You don't think they'll follow us to the first floor? They're not the kind to let something like this go, Jan Den said grimly. Even if they don't chase us now, we'll see them again. They're a four-man team. Just enough to handle the monsters on the second floor. At that moment, Jan Den realized something. The hostile party they'd seen earlier had been lingering near the entrance. That could mean they were planning to descend to the first floor and head back to the city on the seventh day. The two of them kept running, talking as they went. In other words, Erwin said between breaths, they're doing exactly what we are. Jan Den gave a short nod. Looks that way. Before he could say more, Erwin's sharp eyes caught movement ahead. Hold up, 5 goblins, just a few meters away. His first instinct was to avoid them. This time, we go around. No need to fight. But Erwin's tone shifted. We can't. They're charging straight at us. What? Jan Den's mind raced. In all the days they'd been exploring, goblins had never spotted them first. Erwin's detection skills had always given them the upper hand. They swerved down a narrow side path, boots pounding against stone and dirt. Is this just a coincidence? Jan Den muttered. Doesn't matter, Erwin replied. We're heading the other way. Erwin froze when she heard his command, shocked for a moment before nodding. All right. They hadn't run far when an arrow whistled past and thudded into the ground ahead. Jan Den's instinct screamed, this wasn't the work of a goblin archer. A sharp tug yanked Erwin back by the collar. She winced. I can dodge on my own, you know. It's them, Jan Den growled. The ones from earlier? Before she could get an answer, the reality of their situation hit. They were trapped between the goblins and that same hostile group. The enemy had likely herded the monsters here, waiting on the other side to finish the job. They want to weaken us first, Jan Den barked. We'll fight. Use Cody's strength. Erwin blinked. My strength? The essence, I mean. Every essence has its own abilities. Earlier, she had absorbed the essence of a goblin archer. In the dungeon's strange rules, such an essence boosted certain stats and granted both passive and active skills. Hers included a passive, poison-tipped arrows, and an active one, something the system called Rogue Step. I don't even know how to use it, she admitted. You just did. She looked down and gasped, her body was gone, or rather, invisible. The active skill cloaks you, Jan Den said, eyes narrowing. Now take this. He tossed her his pack. I'll deal with the goblins. You find the one with the crossbow. Wait, you're going alone? That's no time. His voice was sharp. Stay cloaked. When I signal, shoot him. You only get one chance. With that, he charged into the fray, hammer swinging. She hesitated, then darted away, vanishing into the trees. Jan Den stopped a few paces later. This was far enough. The goblins clustered to his left, about a dozen of them, two wielding swords. Still no sign of arrows from the human crossbowman. Then one arrow came flying. He raised his shield just in time. There you are. A goblin lunged from behind. He slammed it aside, barely keeping the others at bay. No Erwin to cover him this time. Wounds began to multiply, blood on his shoulder, pain lancing down his arm. Two more arrows came in unison, one from the goblin archer, the other from the human marksman. He couldn't block both. Choosing, he lifted the shield against the crossbow bolt and let the goblin's arrow sink into his arm. Poison burned instantly, locking the joint. Left arm useless. He had to choose between hammer and shield. He chose the shield. The real threat wasn't the goblins, it was the cowards hiding beyond them. If he dropped the shield, he'd be open to every shot. He pressed on, fighting one-handed. When the last goblin fell, mocking laughter came from the brush. "You took them all out yourself? Didn't think you had it in you," one sneered. "I knew it was you," Jan Den said, his voice cold. No sign of the crossbowman. The leader stepped forward, grinning. "Yeah, it was us. Now, where's the elf girl? Tell me, and maybe we let you live." Jan Den's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. "Let me live? That's cute." His smirk only seemed to irritate them further. "Did you just laugh, you lunatic? Fine. We'll beat the truth out of you. Think of it like hunting a giant beast." They surged forward, weapons raised. Jan Den shifted his stance, his shield braced, the weight of his hammer in his good hand. His left arm hung useless at his side, poisoned and unresponsive. Erwin was still somewhere out there, but had she found the crossbowman yet? He had no way of knowing. He needed a signal, something only she would recognize. Then it came to him. With deliberate slowness, he raised his hand and made a gesture no one in this world would understand, no one except her. If she was watching, she'd know exactly what it meant. The three men hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces. One snarled, "What the hell are you doing?" Jan Den didn't answer. His eyes locked on them like a predator sighting prey. The tension thickened until it felt like the air itself might shatter. Sweat trickled down his temple, but there was no time for doubt. Erwin was too far away for certainty, but he had to trust her. Because once these men charged again, there would be no second chances. In that split second, Jan Den tightened his grip on his weapon and lunged forward with a burst of speed his enemies never anticipated. Steel met steel in a deafening clash, the sound ringing through the battlefield. Both sides locked in a brutal exchange, neither willing to yield an inch. The leader barked a sharp command, his voice rough and strained, "Elias, hold back." Without hesitation, he retreated a few paces, creating space to direct his two subordinates into the fray. But Jan Den refused to give them the initiative. His armor was already soaked in blood, the jagged edges of his wounds stinging with every movement, yet his gaze burned with relentless determination. Then, from somewhere beyond the chaos, a volley of flaming arrows streaked through the air, hurtling straight toward Kirk and Elias. The sudden assault caught them off guard. One scrambled forward, raising his shield in a desperate attempt to block the incoming barrage. "Focus on me. I'll hold them off," he shouted, but his words barely left his mouth before another wave of fire-tipped arrows came screaming in, faster and deadlier than the first. Flames erupted, hungry and wild, threatening to consume everything in their path. A faint smile tugged at Jan Den's lips. Perfect. Erwin had seen his signal. She was with him now, her presence felt even from afar. He turned his attention back to the three enemies, his voice ringing with challenge. "Your turn. Let's see if you can block every arrow. My archer isn't just anyone, she's a spirit marksman." On the far side of the battlefield, the shield-bearer strained under the relentless hail of arrows while the man in the wide-brimmed hat seized the moment. Closing in on Jan Den's steel clashed in the flickering light of the surrounding flames, every strike echoing the intensity of the fight. The bandaged commander's eyes narrowed as he took in the chaos. His voice cut through the roar of battle, laced with frustration. "This is turning bad, damn it." In the next breath, he made his choice, breaking away from the fight entirely. "I'll deal with that elf girl myself." Even as he wrestled with the hat-wearing attacker, Jan Den saw him retreating and knew he couldn't allow it. But the commander was already too far ahead. Chasing him now would be nearly impossible. The hat-wearer smirked, throwing a heavy punch at Jan Denver. "Give it up, demon," he taunted, the words dripping with contempt. Jan Den's answer was a calm, cold smile. He stepped back, letting the blow pass harmlessly, then drove all his remaining strength into a single counterpunch. The man dodged with surprising agility, but his companion standing just behind him wasn't so lucky. Jan Den's fist slammed into the unsuspecting soldier, sending him flying. Blood spilled from the man's mouth as he hit the ground hard, his body crumpling under the force. The man in the hat watched his comrade crumble to the ground, rage flaring in his eyes. "Damn you," he roared, sword flashing as he charged at Jan Den, driven purely by the need for vengeance. Jan Den sidestepped with fluid precision, the blade cutting through empty air. He didn't waste words. Every ounce of his focus was locked on the duel now that only the two of them remained. Steel met steel in a rapid, brutal exchange. The hat-wearer was strong, but Jan Den gave no ground. A thought flickered briefly in Jan Den's mind: why was a fighter of this caliber running with such worthless allies? Whatever the answer, Jan Den knew the man had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The clash grew fiercer, each strike heavy enough to shatter bone. Then Jan Den caught it, the subtle shift in his opponent's stance, the slow retreat. His eyes narrowed. "Buying time for your friends to come back, aren't you?" he thought, a cold grin tugging at his lips. That plan would never see daylight. He feinted with his shield, then in the same motion hurled it with all his strength. The heavy slab of iron crashed into the man's chest, the impact folding him to his knees. Jan Den closed the distance in a heartbeat, seizing the man by the collar and lifting him effortlessly until their eyes met. "Looks like you've run out of ways to escape." With a feral roar, Jan Den sank his teeth into the neck of the man in the hat. Warm blood burst forth, splattering across his face in a crimson spray. His victim writhed in agony, but Jan Den didn't flinch. He tossed the man to the ground like discarded prey, his own face streaked with blood, eyes burning with unshaken resolve. "You think I'd die in a place like this?" he growled, his voice cold and sharp. Both enemies now lay defeated. From the shadows of the forest, Erwin emerged, her voice laced with worry. "Are you all right?" The concern on her face softened Jan Den's expression, and for a brief moment, a small smile tugged at his lips. She, too, had clearly won her battle. Without hesitation, Erwin pressed a small vial into his hand. "Your wounds are bad. Drink this, quickly." He glanced at the liquid, uncertain. "Drink it?" "Yes," she urged firmly. "It will work better than applying it directly. You're badly hurt, and we don't have time to waste." Her urgency left no room for doubt. Trusting her, Jan Den raised the vial to his lips and downed it in one go. The change was immediate. A blazing red aura erupted around him, heat surging through every vein as though fire itself had taken root in his body. His pulse thundered, his skin prickled and burned, and a strange, restless energy began to coil within him like a living flame. Jan Den clenched his teeth, forcing himself to endure the burning sensation tearing through his body. Beside him, Erwin stayed close, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. "Just a little more, you can do it." The surge from the potion coursed through his veins like liquid fire. Each heartbeat felt as if flames were licking at his insides, yet slowly, the pain shifted into something strangely bearable. Wounds began to knit closed, the bleeding slowed, and strength returned to his limbs. Erwin didn't take her eyes off him for a second. Her small hands were clasped tightly together, her gaze fixed on him as if willing the healing to complete. "You're almost there," she encouraged softly. "What time is it?" he asked without looking up. 11:20, she answered. "We've already lost 10 minutes. His brow furrowed. "That means 40 minutes until the first floor seals, we don't even have time to rest." Her expression tightened at his words. Anxiety quickened her steps, each passing second seeming to press down on her even more heavily. "No resting," Janden said coldly, his eyes locked on the looming gate ahead. Then, without warning, he turned to her, his tone dead serious. "Take off your clothes." Erwin froze, her face instantly flushing crimson. Her breathing hitched as she stammered, "What?" Although a flicker of suspicion crossed her mind, Erwin still obeyed his sudden command. So abrupt, but he must have a reason, she thought. Janden quickly caught the misunderstanding. He waved his hand. "No, that's not what I meant. I'm talking about those adventurers over there." He pointed toward the distance. Relief washed over her, though her cheeks still burned. She forced herself to regain composure just as the system display began its relentless countdown, 39 minutes, 59 seconds. Without wasting another heartbeat, Janden strode to the fallen shield bearer and searched his gear, stripping away anything of use. Across the battlefield, Erwin did the same to the two red-haired fighters and a crossbowman. They worked with ruthless efficiency, neither hesitating for even a second. The numbers on the system screen kept ticking down, 34 minutes, 27 seconds, 26 minutes, 48 seconds, 13 minutes, 37 seconds. Each passing moment hammered into them the truth: time was the real enemy. Clutching the gear they had scavenged, both of them bolted toward the massive gate. Janden's eyes darted to the timer again, 8 minutes, 33 seconds left. They didn't slow down, every stride pushing them faster, legs pounding the ground as though they were running above it. When the timer reached 2 minutes and 15 seconds, the radiant light of the gate finally came into view. It shone like the only escape from the relentless pursuit of time. Janden and Erwin didn't slow for an instant. Every muscle strained as they hurled themselves toward the gate at full speed. 50 seconds remained. Breath ragged, Janden muttered between gasps, "We're going straight through." He glanced at Erwin, finding the same unshakable resolve burning in her eyes. At 48 seconds, they crossed the threshold. A blinding light engulfed them, wrapping around their bodies like the pull of a whirlpool, dragging them beyond the world they knew. When their vision cleared, the system display still hovered before them. Remaining time, 40 seconds. Another line appeared, cold yet promising: Floor 1 infiltration successful. They landed hard on solid ground, both stumbling from the sudden shift. Erwin recovered first, her face breaking into a radiant smile despite the dust and sweat clinging to her skin. "That was amazing," she said, her voice alive with exhilaration. Janden, however, remained on one knee, catching his breath. "In truth, we were just thrown out," he muttered, shaking his head. He found himself wondering why she always seemed to land without injury. Erwin's smile didn't falter. "You did well," she said warmly, pride lacing her voice. Lifting his gaze, Janden gave a faint nod. "So did you." Yet, as the memory of that final sprint flashed in his mind, a chill crept through him. They had been a heartbeat away from failure. If his memory was right, they had crossed the gate with only 39 seconds left to spare. Lost in thought, Janden suddenly felt a spark of urgency. Something important had just clicked in his mind. He turned to Erwin. "Hey, remember that essence you mentioned earlier?" His tone carried a trace of curiosity. "What exactly is it?" Erwin's eyes lit up as if she'd just remembered a half-forgotten promise. "You told me once that you had to make some sort of pledge to receive it." "That's right," Janden murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Then he shook his head. "We'll talk about it later. Right now, time is the enemy." The system's cold countdown kept flashing before them. 10 seconds. Without warning, an image flashed in his mind, a scene from a place they'd been before. A tavern. The memory was there, but slippery, fading like smoke between his fingers. He pushed harder, trying to grasp it. 8 seconds. 4 seconds. The name, what was the name? His heart pounded. Come on, brain, work with me, he muttered under his breath. It's not like I'm asking you to solve advanced mathematics. 1 second. The name exploded in his mind like a firework. He shot upright, eyes wide. Hacking. Meet me at the hacking tavern, he blurted, startling Erwin enough that she almost laughed mid-battle stance. She gave a firm nod, her expression shifting into one of iron resolve. The system's voice cut in, cold and mechanical. The maze is closing. You are being transported to Raphidonia. The sensation hit instantly, as if invisible hands yanked him through a whirlpool made of air. When he blinked, the world had changed. They stood in the bustling heart of Raphidonia, surrounded by others who had survived the same gauntlet. Jan Den straightened, scanning the familiar streets with a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. Well, we made it back, he murmured, almost to himself. Then, with a glance at Erwin, he added under his breath, and I am definitely getting a drink first. The moment Jan Den set foot back in Raphidonia, he was met with a sea of people. Clearly, every adventurer who made it out of the maze had gathered here, and while he expected a crowd, the sheer number made him raise an eyebrow. All right, this is officially ridiculous, he muttered. He glanced at his wristwatch and adjusted the time. The maze ran on its own strange clock, and no matter how long you stayed inside, once you came out, it was always noon the next day in the city. That meant syncing his watch back to midday to match the city's time zone. From somewhere in the crowd, a booming voice called out. John. Johnny. Jan Den, you old fox. A massive, broad-shouldered man came striding toward him. He looked familiar, sort of. Jan Den stared for a moment, silently rifling through his mental Rolodex. Okay, huge guy, friendly face, probably knows me. Name starts with a number? No, that can't be right. They clasped hands in a firm handshake. Jan Den, still trying to place the man, blurted, "You're Vanong's second son, right? Karak?" The man gave him a look somewhere between amusement and offense. Second? Try third son of Vanong. Before Jan Den could recover, another man with messy blonde hair stepped up, grinning wide. Karak. Still in one piece, huh? Makes me happy to see you alive. Karak blinked. Wait, you're... Serum. Fourth son of Senek. Still kicking, somehow. One by one, more familiar yet distant faces closed in. It was like a family reunion where you vaguely recognized everyone but couldn't remember their names, and they all insisted you should. Hey, that's Naren over there, someone called. Another voice chimed in. You're looking good, Jan Den. So, how was the maze? The noise swelled until Jan Den found himself surrounded by his own people, all talking at once, each demanding stories, updates, or just shouting over the others. In the back of his mind, he wondered if surviving the maze had been easier than surviving this crowd. Looking at the noisy group gathered around Karak, Jan Den couldn't help but be impressed. This guy's social circle is ridiculous, he thought. The crowd was a chaotic mix of cheers, jokes, and loud boasting. Those sharp-maned wolves? Please, they're nothing, someone shouted. I took them down with a kite, another bragged. Jan Den stood slightly off to the side, watching the reunion unfold. What is this, a Lost Brothers from Four Continents gathering? Where do these people even come from, he muttered under his breath. Right there in the middle of the main road, Karak puffed out his chest as someone called, Karak, my dear friend, how about a little contest at the checkpoint? Karak's eyes lit up. Perfect. I'll show everyone what a true warrior's courage looks like. The group roared their approval and began marching away like a parade no one had asked for. Jan Den sighed, thinking, well, there goes most of the magic crystal hall straight into their hands. The surrounding adventurers gave the eccentric bunch plenty of space, wary of getting caught up in whatever madness was brewing. One of Karak's companions turned to Jan Den. Were you coming? Reluctantly, he replied, yeah, sure. The mob descended on the crystal checkpoint, where a young blonde clerk with pigtails was tallying loot from various adventurers. 14,476. 28,420. 41,496. With each count, the cheers grew louder. Someone yelled, over 40,000. That's insane. All eyes turned to Karak, basking in the praise. Karak, third son of Canaan, a warrior among warriors. Then it was Jan Den's turn. He dropped his entire stash of crystal bags onto the counter. The clerk glanced up. All of these are magic crystals? Yes, he replied simply. Her hands moved like lightning, counting and sorting with such speed that Jan Den's jaw dropped. Whoa, he muttered, does she train with ninjas or something? Within moments, the clerk finished counting. 182,413, she announced. Even Jan Den had to blink a few times. He knew he'd done well in the labyrinth, but seeing that number made him feel like he'd just robbed a dragon's hoard. The crowd around the checkpoint erupted. Shock turned to awe, awe turned to loud chatter. John, son of Jan Den, just broke the record. Over 180,000 crystals. And look at him. Not just crystals, he's got an axe, boots, and even a new bag. Murmurs of disbelief and envy spread quickly. How is that even possible? Someone finally shouted what the rest were thinking. John, son of Jan Den, warrior of warriors. The chant began. John. John. Jan Den couldn't help himself. He thought, well, of course they're impressed. I'm the first one to enter the labyrinth with empty hands and walk out a proper citizen, plus a little richer. With a smirk, he hefted his warhammer high above his head. I am the greatest warrior, he declared, his voice booming with unashamed pride. The crowd cheered like they'd just crowned a king. Several of them even lifted him into the air, tossing him up in celebration. It was all going well until a voice cut through the noise. Please, keep it down. This is a public checkpoint. Everyone froze, mumbled a quick apology, and tried to look innocent. Nearby townsfolk whispered to each other. Is it always this chaotic here? Nope. Must be another bunch of clan members. Eventually, the group spilled out of the checkpoint and found a spot to rest. Jan Den glanced at the others and thought, maybe I should stick with this crazy lot for a while. If nothing else, it'll be entertaining. Jan Den figured there must be something important going on that he hadn't been told about. Fine, he would just sit here, wait for them to return, and then tag along. From a distance, a familiar figure caught his eye. Wait, is that? It was Erwin. She was standing with a small group of spirits, and unlike ordinary townsfolk, these beings practically glowed with an otherworldly presence. He overheard her say, I think I finally know how to handle the elemental spirits. A tall white-haired spirit woman replied, oh really? I heard fire spirits are notoriously impatient. You might have your hands full. Jan Den, sitting among his boisterous clanmates, thought, so this is the kind of crowd she hangs out with. Meanwhile, I'm stuck here surrounded by big sweaty men glaring at me like I just stole their lunch. It seemed Erwin had noticed him. From across the square, she waved. They exchanged a subtle gesture, an unspoken agreement to meet later that night. The white-haired spirit, sharp-eyed and curious, asked Erwin, do you know that man? She quickly shook her head. No idea who he is. Back with the clan, Karak noticed Jan Den's gaze. What are you staring at? Don't tell me you know those elf girls? Jan Den shot back instantly. Of course not. But Karak wasn't buying it. He grinned wickedly and raised his voice on purpose, loud enough for the elves to hear. No way a top-ranked warrior like you would hang around with pointy-eared folks like them, right? The white-haired spirit's friendly face instantly turned into a scowl. Jan Den froze, his mind flashing with the thought, perfect. Just perfect. One day these wild cavemen are going to get me killed. The tension in the air was so thick you could slice it with a rusty spoon. Even passers-by were slowing down, whispering things like, "What is this, some kind of Romeo and Juliet situation?" Just then, a few of the clan members came strolling out from the checkpoint. Finally done, one of them grumbled. Not wanting the situation to spiral into a full-blown elf versus human brawl, Jan Den raised his voice. "Alright, looks like we're all here. Let's move." Everyone agreed without argument, probably because they didn't want to be caught in the middle of a romantic tragedy with swords involved. Jan Den knew there was no way to approach Erwin in this atmosphere without causing a scene, so he decided he'd find her later that night instead. The group began to march through town. As they walked, the streets painted a bittersweet picture. Families reunited, fathers rushing to hug wives and children, brothers clasping arms, mothers clutching their sons as if they'd never let go again. The joy was contagious, but so was the sorrow. For every happy embrace, there were people kneeling in grief, wives without husbands, children without fathers, warriors staring into nothing, haunted by the faces of comrades they couldn't save. It was the same kind of emotional whiplash Jan Den had seen countless times while playing Dungeon and Stone. He'd cleared that game thousands of times, but now that he was actually walking through the real thing, past real tear-streaked faces instead of tidy little 2D sprites, it felt different. In the game, he could skip the sad cutscenes with a single button press. Here, there was no skip option, and no background music to soften the blow. The celebration moved to a noisy tavern, where the clan was downing drinks like their lives depended on it. One toast after another, cheers. Bottoms up. Drink. Row. It was like a drunken battle chant. Meanwhile, Jan Den sat quietly in the corner, wondering how on earth he had ended up here. He had joined them thinking there might be some important step in his progression, some crucial event he couldn't miss. Instead, all he got was a front row seat to the great ale flood of Raphidonia. These people weren't just drinking. They were committing to the act of getting obliterated. At this point, the only thing they could fight was gravity. Fed up, he stood and announced, "I'm stepping out for a bit." Karak, already glassy-eyed, blinked at him. "You're leaving now?" The others perked up. "What? The hero of the day is heading home already?" Hero of the day? Jan Den thought. More like unwilling mascot. But apparently, he wasn't allowed to leave until they gave him an overly dramatic send-off. Eventually, they let him go, slapping him on the back with shouts of, "Good luck, strongest warrior John, son of Jan Den." The walk back was calm. No monsters lurking in the shadows, no shady figures tailing him, just the steady hum of the town. Snippets of conversations drifted by. "Tonight, I'm buying the next round. My husband went into the dungeon this time." There was an easy order to the streets, a sense of quiet safety. Jan Den found himself thinking that even if he stumbled here, someone would probably reach out a hand to pull him back up. That was just the kind of place Raphidonia was. He stopped at a street rack, grabbed a fresh change of clothes, and made his way into the inn, ready to call it a night. This world might not be as advanced as Earth in the 21st century, but it carried a quiet peace of its own. Jan Den reached room 305, washed away the dried blood and grime clinging to him, and thought that maybe living in this city wouldn't be so bad after all. The hot water eased the aches from battle, leaving him refreshed. He collapsed onto the bed, one arm draped over his forehead, and admitted to himself, he still wanted to go home. Even if no one was waiting for him there, that longing never faded. Before he knew it, sleep had pulled him under. When he awoke, the room was wrapped in darkness. The clock read 9:18 p.m. He must have slept 4 or 5 hours since returning from the dungeon at midday. And then he remembered, he had an appointment with Erwin at the Harkin Tavern. He stepped out and asked an old vendor on the street for directions. The man looked at him like he had asked about a ghost. The Harkin Tavern? Son, that place disappeared 10 years ago. Disappeared? Jan Den frowned. The old man sighed. The owner's boy got himself tangled in drink, gambling, and more debts than a dragon's hoard. The place was sold off, new name, new owner. But that tavern, it was a piece of history. A place full of memories for generations. Shame, really. Jan Den had half expected it, but hearing it still struck a chord. In the game, the tavern had been right where he remembered. But this wasn't the game anymore. Time had moved on. So, what's it called now? The old man squinted, as if pulling the name out of the air. Let me think, yes. The Python Pit. Following the directions, Jan Den arrived at its doors. This was supposedly the old Harkin Tavern, though the exterior looked nothing like the one in his memories. The signboard was gaudy, the paint still fresh, and the atmosphere felt completely different. At least, he thought with mild relief, he could still read the language here. But the thought of how much he didn't know about this world weighed on him. Sooner or later, he would have to spend a few days in the library catching up on the history of this place. The tavern was lively, filled with the clink of mugs and the hum of half-drunken conversation. John stepped inside, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. The place was chaotic enough to make his eyes dart in every direction. "Hey, over here," a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Erwin waving, seated with none other than the white-haired elf he had seen earlier. He made his way over, wondering why the elf looked vaguely familiar. The white-haired woman gave him a sharp once-over. "So, you are the so-called barbarian everyone talks about?" John smiled politely. "Name's John, son of Jan Denver." "And you are?" She leaned back, resting an arm on her chair. "I am the older sister of this one," she said, tilting her head toward Erwin. That caught him off guard. "You are her sister?" "Call me Teresia," she replied with a tone that suggested she was not offering her real name. He glanced at Erwin, whose full name he now suspected might be something long and formal, but she simply avoided his gaze. "So, Teresia," John asked, "what brings you here tonight?" Before Erwin could answer, her sister slammed her hand on the table, making the mugs rattle. "Listen, Barbarian. I have one question. Why exactly are you arranging late-night meetings with a young lady in a tavern like this?" John blinked at her, taken aback by the sudden interrogation. Teresia's eyes narrowed. "And another thing. Last night, you told Erwin to meet you in some questionable establishment, then you never showed up. She waited the whole night, and you have the audacity to stand here asking me why she is here?" John frowned. "Last night? What are you talking about?" "Do not play dumb," she shot back. Confused, John turned to Erwin. "How long have we been out of the dungeon?" She thought for a moment. "About 30 hours. The realization hit him like a warhammer. 30 hours, not 4. No wonder he had felt so refreshed when he woke up, he had slept through an entire day. He rubbed the back of his neck and faced Erwin. "I am sorry." Erwin, meanwhile, just stared at him in bafflement, as if she could not decide whether to forgive him or hit him with her chair. John finally broke the silence. "I am truly sorry. I overslept." Both women raised their eyebrows at him. What, have they never seen a demon folk apologize before? He thought. Erwin looked faintly surprised, while Teresia stared at him as if she had just witnessed a unicorn juggling knives. "Well," Teresia said slowly, "since you are a demon folk, I never expected you to arrive on time anyway. But now I have to ask, why exactly did you call Erwin out here?" John considered spinning a long, elaborate story full of half-truths, but decided against it. Instead, he put on his most nonchalant face. "I do not have to explain myself to you. If you are curious, ask Erwin." Teresia's jaw tightened, her smile turning sharp. "I knew it. Demon folk are all the same." "Oh, come on," John shot back. "What does that have to do with anything? Maybe you should drop the overprotective act, unless, of course, you plan on guarding Erwin for the rest of her life." That earned him a glare hot enough to melt steel. Erwin, sensing the tension rising, quickly tried to step in. Maybe we should." Before she could finish, Teresia reached into her bag and slammed a heavy black pouch onto the table. The sound made several nearby patrons glance over. "Here. Take it. 350,000 stones, she said coldly. That is what Erwin earned from gathering essence. John glanced at the pouch and blinked. This is exactly like one of those K-drama moments. Any second now she is going to say, "Take the money and leave her alone." Sure enough, the thought hung in the air without her having to say it. While John was still picturing himself as the tragic male lead in a soap opera, Teresia frowned. "Why are you not taking it? Do not tell me you have another motive?" John ignored her entirely and turned to Erwin. "Do you agree with her?" Erwin hesitated, her voice soft. "That is complicated." John leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "The price for that essence I gave you is simple. You help me until I gather enough essence to complete my mission." Erwin's eyes went wide. "Wait, that's what this was about?" He nodded. "Exactly. We split everything 50-50. For a brief moment, her eyes sparkled like crystal under sunlight, but just as quickly, the light faded and her shoulders slumped. I'm sorry." John frowned. "Why? We worked really well together in the dungeon." Teresia's expression hardened. "From now on, Erwin will be entering the labyrinth with me. Letting her go alone this time was just a tradition for first expeditions. I never planned on sending her into the depths unaccompanied again." John's brow furrowed. "I see, so she already has someone to watch her back." Just like that, the fragile partnership he had imagined was already falling apart. Teresia slid the pouch of stones toward him. "If you understand, please take this money." John didn't move. "Hold on. If I'm not mistaken, 350,000 stones is only half the market value of the essence we collected, isn't it?" "Of course," Teresia replied coolly. "You've already gotten quite a lot." John leaned forward. "In that case, you're short 280,000 stones. We agreed on a 9-to-1 split, remember?" Teresia's lips curved into a sly smirk. Right. I almost forgot. Here, 280,000 more." John took the pouch with narrowed eyes. "Seriously? Was she planning to shortchange me if I didn't bring it up? What a petty little fox-eared accountant." John finally understood why demons couldn't stand elves. "If you're done," he said evenly, "could you step outside for a bit? I still have something to discuss with Erwin." Teresia didn't hesitate. "You still have business with her, huh?" Before John could answer, Erwin put on the kind of adorable, pleading face that could melt armor. "Sis, thank you for worrying about me and coming all this way. But could you go back first? I just need to say goodbye and thank him properly." Teresia studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. You're not a child anymore." She pointed a sharp finger at John. "But swear it, demon." John blinked. "Swear, what, exactly?" "That you won't sleep with Erwin, and I'll leave right now." Erwin's face went scarlet. What are you even saying, sis?" John, on the other hand, stayed perfectly calm, thinking, not sleep with her? "So, other options are still on the table, then." "Swear it," Teresia repeated, louder this time. "Fine," John said solemnly. "I swear, on the honor of a warrior." Of course, deep down, he couldn't care less about that so-called warrior's honor. Erwin's eyes shimmered. "Oh, you." Satisfied with the oath, Teresia stood and turned toward the door. "Good. Then I'm leaving. Oh, almost forgot. Thank you for saving Erwin, John, son of Janelle." Once she was gone, Erwin let out a long sigh and slumped over the table. After Teresia left, Erwin let out a long sigh and slumped over the table. "What should I do? I've never gone against my sister before. Do you think she'll be mad?" John studied her expression. With that small smile still lingering on her lips, she didn't look particularly furious. "Don't worry about it," he said. Erwin's shoulders eased. That's a relief. Oh, right, thanks for your earlier offer, but I'd already decided to assist my sister before this. So, I'm really sorry. John waved it off without hesitation. No need to apologize. If a high-ranking elf offered to back me up in a dungeon, I wouldn't say no either. He thought to himself, not that anyone's ever made that kind of offer to me before. Erwin slid another small pouch across the table. Here, exactly 63,000 magic crystals from the blood claw and the crossbow loot. I already took my share, so you don't have to worry. Also, I packed up most of your gear for tomorrow, but there's still a lot left, you should prepare the rest yourself. John nodded, slightly impressed. She'd anticipated his question before he could even ask. He'd given up on recruiting her to his team, but still, what a waste. Erwin hesitated, then asked shyly, how should I repay you? I promised I'd thank you for helping me. John immediately guessed the reason behind Teresia's earlier, no sleeping together oath. Ah, so she was afraid I'd make some weird demand for repayment. Repay me? John leaned back. Right now I can't think of anything. But, are you hungry? Want to get something to eat? Erwin shook her head with a soft smile. I'm not that hungry. John stood up. Alright, I'll just order for myself then. Erwin's cheeks flushed slightly as she hesitated, then said, actually, I want to drink. Yesterday I had to resist the temptation all night. I want to share a proper drinking match with you. Drinking match? John recalled that in the game, this was a cultural thing, especially meaningful for elves who spent their youth sheltered in temples. Their first match was practically a rite of passage. He pretended to think it over, then nodded. It would be my honor. Erwin's eyes lit up. You're supposed to say thank you. Thank you? She grinned like a flower in full bloom. Of course. We went through the dungeon together. Naturally, we should share our first drinking match too. Maybe it's not your first time but... Wait, what? John interrupted, confused. This is my first time as well. I told you, I'm only 20. Erwin blinked in disbelief. You're joking. Nope, John said with a smirk. First time in a dungeon, first time for this too. Later, their table was covered with food, the air rich with the smell of roasted meat and spice. Erwin giggled, you did really well in there, you know. John returned a faint smile. So did you. The two clinked cups and drank deeply. Before long, the wine began to take effect. Erwin's face turned rosy, her words a little slurred. You know, you look kind of stylish in that shirt today. John took another sip, feeling the warmth in his head. And you, well, you look pretty good in that dress too. After a moment of casual chatter, John decided it was time to get to the real point. His expression turned serious. Erwin, earlier you said you wanted to repay me, right? Well, I've finally thought of something. Her eyes were a little hazy from the drink. What is it? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Not here. If I say it here, the guards might start watching us. She tilted her head, thinking, then said without hesitation, then, why don't we go to your room? John raised an eyebrow, then quickly nodded. Sounds like a good idea. In the quiet of his room, John stood opposite her, rolling his shoulders. Alright, Erwin. Spread out your stance. What? She barely had time to react before John moved. His hand caught her left wrist and twisted it in a controlled motion. Ah. My shoulder, she yelped. You're about to pop it out of the socket. John's forehead glistened with sweat as he focused on his grip. Wow, it's harder than I thought to control my strength here. Her eyes watered. If you keep this up, my arm's going to be permanently bent the wrong way. You sure you're okay? He asked, voice still calm. I swear on my family's honor, she cried, half in pain and half in panic. Alright, take a breather. He released her immediately, and she stumbled back, clutching her arm. Still in one piece? She examined her shoulder, relieved. I think so. Still, that was terrifying. John flexed his fingers and thought to himself, guess an extra 4 points in agility doesn't feel like much in real life after all. Erwin's cheeks were still red, though this time it wasn't just from the wine. Wait. You brought me here just to test my abilities? Exactly, John replied without shame. It's not like we're allowed to use powers freely inside the city. I just wanted to see how the essence works here compared to in the game. Erwin's cheeks turned pink. I have no idea. The truth was, Dungeon and Stone was never designed to be a friendly, hand-holding sort of game. Anyone who'd ever opened the status window would know that instantly. The game had 3 main stats, body, mind, and ability, but if you tapped the tiny plus sign next to any of them, a whole encyclopedia of substats would spill out, thousands of them, each more confusing than the last. Take stamina, for example. It boosted endurance, let you haul heavier loot, and made your physical attacks hit harder. That's why 2 characters could have similar overall stats yet perform completely differently in the field. A body of 50 didn't tell the whole story. I'd learned all of this the hard way, by sinking thousands of hours into the game. Even after 9 years, I was still stumbling across obscure stats with game-breaking potential, wondering how on earth I'd missed them before. One stat in particular remained a mystery, obsession. John Janden glanced at Erwin. That stat had appeared after she absorbed a certain essence. He knew almost nothing about it, other than the fact it was tucked away under the mind category and considered a low-tier attribute. Low tier or not, John had the uneasy feeling it might be more dangerous than it looked, kind of like a harmless-looking mushroom you later find out was on the please don't eat unless you want to hallucinate for a week list. Erwin was still blushing, her eyes darting between the floor and John. So, are we doing anything else now? She asked, almost as if she wasn't sure whether she wanted to know the answer. John tilted his head. Since leaving the labyrinth, have you felt different? Like, maybe overthinking things too much, or getting impatient for no reason? She paused, frowning in thought. I'm not sure. Then her eyes lit up suddenly. Oh. Cookies. I've never eaten that many before, but as soon as we got back I devoured an entire batch. John froze. Wait, is that what obsession does? Boosts cravings? That would explain why it seemed completely useless in the game. No one cared if their character was secretly hoarding pastries. Still, there could be other hidden effects he didn't know about. Maybe he should think this through before. His thoughts were cut short when Erwin stepped closer and tugged lightly on his shirt. She looked up at him, cheeks still pink. Hey. I'm sleepy now. John blinked. I was going to check a few more things, but, oh fine. Alright. Bedtime it is. He blew out the candle, and the room fell into darkness. He lay down and closed his eyes, but his brain refused to stop turning over possibilities and half-baked theories. Then, like a lightning bolt, a thought hit him. Wait, her sister told me I wasn't allowed to sleep with her. At that exact moment, Erwin shifted closer until she was snuggled right up against him. John's heart skipped. This is probably fine. Probably. It's probably fine, John told himself. She probably meant the other kind of sleeping together, right? Before his brain could wander any further into dangerous territory, Erwin's eyes caught something on the floor. Whoa, are these all the spoils from earlier? She crouched down, grinning like a kid in a candy shop. There are so many. Coming to our first thing was clearly the right call. John chuckled. Yeah, well, now comes the fun part. We're selling most of it. The two of them crouched over the pile, sorting through glinting blades, worn armor, and assorted trinkets. We'll sell everything except a few pieces, John decided. In a flash, Erwin's hands darted into the pile and emerged holding a sleek outfit and an ornate belt. She looked up at him with wide, sparkling eyes. Then, can I keep these too? John pretended to weigh the decision like a strict merchant. All right. but I'm deducting them from your share. Deal, she said instantly, hugging the items like they were long-lost treasures. When he brought the sword to the counter, the shopkeeper raised it high, examining the blade carefully before saying with a grin that he would pay 350,000 spirit stones for it. At the next store, another sale was made, adding 180,000 to the growing fortune. John Janden visited yet another merchant, who offered 250,000 for the entire lot. After a quick calculation, he realized his earnings had already reached a staggering 1,450,000 spirit stones. Erwin could hardly believe it. His voice trembled as he asked if this was really happening. For him, this amount was unimaginable. John, however, corrected his own mistake, taking out Erwin's share and concluding that he was still left with around 1,400,000. He smiled in satisfaction, thinking it was an excellent start. With their business concluded, John suggested they part ways. Erwin looked a little disappointed but reluctantly agreed. Since their paths overlapped, they walked together toward the central plaza. Erwin admitted quietly that he wished he could stay with John a little longer. As they arrived, a large crowd had gathered. Erwin's eyes widened in surprise as he asked what could possibly draw so many people. In the center of the square stood a grim scene. Soldiers were shouting at the onlookers to step back, their voices echoing across the plaza. A condemned prisoner, gagged and trembling, knelt beneath the looming blade of the guillotine. These were not murderers, arsonists, or violent criminals. Their crime was something far less sinister yet treated with the same severity, failing to pay their taxes. The soldier's command cut through the murmuring crowd, declaring that the execution was about to begin. The rope was pulled, and the blade descended swiftly, ending the prisoner's fate in a single decisive moment. Ravronia, the last surviving city of the Otherworld, had long since been cursed by a witch's spell. The only place left to gather resources was the labyrinth, a deadly maze that became both lifeline and executioner. In this city, those who failed to pay their taxes were not simply punished, they were executed. It was the ruler's way of keeping the population under control. When the guillotine fell, a frenzy erupted. People rushed forward with eyes burning with greed, pushing and shoving to be the first to reach the corpse. "Move aside, it's my turn," one shouted as they dipped bread into the prisoner's blood and devoured it with religious devotion. Erwin's face turned pale with shock. She gasped, asking why they would do something so grotesque. John explained grimly. A legend claimed that drinking the blood of the executed brought wealth and fortune. To the desperate, it was hope. To him, it was a warning. "How much is the tax for the first year?" Erwin asked hesitantly. 700,000 spirit stones, she whispered. John frowned. That was already beyond what most people could earn. "And for the second year?" he pressed. 800,000, she answered, plus transaction fees. It clicked in his mind. Just like in the game, the tax increased year by year, forcing adventurers to grow stronger or be crushed by debt and death alike. John clenched his fists. If he failed, his blood would one day become the very same feast for those scavengers. That was unacceptable. He needed to survive, to grow stronger, to reach at least the 6th floor of the labyrinth. Only then could he escape the noose that hung over every citizen's head. Later, John found himself standing before the Grand Library. It was massive, far more imposing than the unfinished version he remembered from the game. As he entered, curious stares followed him. He muttered under his breath, realizing it was rare for a half-demon to set foot in such a place. At one of the desks, he spotted a familiar face, Aina, sprawled over an open book, fast asleep. He blinked. The daughter of one of the noble factions? What was she doing here? He poked her lightly with his finger. Slowly, she stirred, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Then she looked up at him, her voice dazed but oddly gentle. "John's son. I'm glad you're still alive." The next moment, her drowsy mumble turned into a burst of excitement. She sat upright, eyes shining as she shouted with joy, "You too, John's son. You survived as well." He quickly told her to lower her voice, embarrassed by her excitement. Aina immediately apologized, saying she never imagined meeting another of her kind here. He replied casually, asking what she was doing in this place. She reminded him of his earlier advice about thinking before acting. That was why she had decided she needed more knowledge if she wanted to make better choices. As she spoke, her fingers brushed over the wrinkled pages of the book she had accidentally crushed while dozing off earlier. It was admirable. Unlike most others of her race, Aina truly stood out. With a spark of enthusiasm in her eyes, she explained that during her time wandering through the labyrinth, she had realized monsters were not the only enemies lurking within. Curious, he asked if something had happened in the maze. But she sighed and closed the book, saying most of their kind would rather boast about their battles than reflect on what they had learned. That was exactly why she had chosen to study, even though reading was so difficult for her. She let out another weary sigh and confessed her struggle to John Jan Denver. Then, as if reaching a decision, she stood up. She said she was planning to visit the temple and learn to read and write from the elders. He asked if she really intended to leave right away. Aina nodded, explaining that if she delayed, she might forget, and the more she discovered, the more she pitied her people. Clutching the book to her chest, she prepared to go. Before leaving, she looked back and admitted she still remembered the promise she had made. If they survived and returned safely, she would repay him for his advice. If you ever need a hand, come find me at the Mad Bull Inn. I'll do whatever I can, Aina said firmly. Got it, John Yenden replied. But don't you dare forget that promise in the next few days. As her figure disappeared into the distance, John muttered under his breath. Something tells me I'll be counting on her sooner than I'd like. He turned back toward the massive library towering before him. Now, how in the world am I supposed to track down the book I need in a place this enormous, he thought, taking in the endless rows of shelves. Up ahead, a small desk came into view, clearly the librarian's station. He approached, only to find the librarian herself dozing off with her chin resting on her hand. Sleeping while on duty, seriously? John smirked to himself. The faint sound of his footsteps stirred her awake. With half-closed eyes and a weary voice, she asked, "Can I help you with something?" "Yes," John answered politely. "I'm looking for books on history. Could you point me in the right direction?" The moment he said it, her eyes seemed to glimmer unnaturally. She murmured a strange incantation, Yasudav, and for a split second John felt a tingle sweep across his body. Did she just cast magic on me? He wondered, startled. But as quickly as it came, the sensation faded, leaving everything seemingly normal. John stood frozen, unsure if anything had really changed. The librarian let out a long yawn before lazily saying that if he wandered around for a while, he would eventually find the books he needed. The only rule was simple: he could not take them outside. Once finished, he had to return them to the exact spot where he found them. John Janden thought about asking again, was it really that easy, just walking around? But when he turned, she was already sound asleep at her desk. He stood frozen for a moment, baffled. There she was, dozing off again. What was wrong with this girl? It did not take him long to realize how the magic of this place worked. The moment he began strolling through the towering shelves, a faint glow shimmered from between the books. Curious, he reached out and pulled one free. So that was it, the magic revealed volumes tied to the words he had in mind. No wonder a massive library like this needed only a single librarian to manage it. Flipping through the first pages, he decided to start with this very book. Its title, The Fall of the World. According to its worn script, thousands of years ago no living thing could survive on this cursed land. A sorceress's spell had poisoned everything, leaving only a single stronghold standing, the city of Ravronia. Desperation drove the royal family to open a passage into another realm. With their people starving and resources running dry, they had no other choice. That hidden realm would later become known as the Labyrinth of today. John Janden read with a sharp focus, immersing himself deeper into the library's secrets. The early history of this world mirrored the opening lore of the game he once knew, though here it carried the weight of reality rather than fantasy. The second book he pulled down was a brief commentary on alchemy 4. It described in careful detail how magic crystals harvested from monsters could be refined into bread, water, and even steel. The dense theory left his head aching, yet he pressed on. He might not understand the formulas no matter how many times he reread them, but he promised himself that he would at least commit the key principles to memory. The third book was titled The Third Holy War. He devoured the text, his mind weaving connections. It chronicled the roots of hatred between the beast-kin and the elves, tracing centuries of bloodshed and betrayal. He muttered to himself that this piece of history explained much of the tension he had witnessed so far. Then came the fourth book, the one that truly caught his attention, The Malevolent Souls, Demons of the Abyss. According to the pages, such demons were not native-born but outsiders, souls from another dimension that forced themselves into the bodies of local inhabitants. He leaned back, almost amused. In a way, the name fit. Though the book never explained why this phenomenon occurred, it detailed the desperate struggle of the royal family and the church to suppress it. Replacing the volume, he sighed in relief. As long as he avoided forbidden words, he thought, he would remain safe. A useful trick, considering he himself was one of those so-called malevolent souls. The fifth book was The Death of the Emperor. It told of Levigen III, the so-called immortal emperor, who had reigned for centuries before finally dying 150 years ago. The game he once played had begun immediately after that death, but now he stood in a world that had moved far beyond it. No wonder the knowledge from the game no longer perfectly aligned with the present reality. Reaching for another volume, he uncovered a record titled Observations on Dimensional Instability. His pulse quickened. Could this be the very book that the golden-haired girl, his unlikely savior, had once studied? The thought lingered in his mind as he turned the first page, curiosity tugging him deeper. The book mentioned an unusual theory. If someone were to step through a gate at the very moment it was closing, the result could cause instability. If that's true, then ending up here might be entirely my fault. How frustrating. I need to stop dwelling on it. Outside the window, night had already fallen. I'll save the rest of the reading for later. 3 days had passed since I left the labyrinth. I sat there thinking. A month here counts as 30 days, which means the labyrinth will open again at midnight on the first day of the month. That gives me 27 days to prepare. Tomorrow, I'll start looking for another companion. A sudden noise snapped me out of my thoughts. Someone was calling me from outside the door. Hey, wake up. It was Erwin's voice. I dragged myself up and opened the door, still half asleep. Morning light poured into the room, forcing me to squint. Erwin stood there, beaming with excitement. I did it. I finally formed a contract. Look, I tried over 10 times with the spirit stone my sister bought me, and it worked. Her smile was so wide her eyes nearly disappeared. It's even stronger because it resonates well with fire. I stayed quiet for a moment before answering calmly. That's lucky. A spirit stone is a rare item that allows someone to form a contract with a spirit, but the success rate is only 10%. They are expensive too, yet she had already tried 10 times in a row. Clearly, this girl must have come from a very wealthy family. I finally understood the situation and told her she could stop summoning now. But instead of listening, she smiled and replied, I haven't even shown you what I can really do. The next moment, the entire room stirred. Furniture shook, objects floated into the air, and the wind howled as if a storm had been unleashed inside 4 walls. I could not help but mutter in disbelief, do you plan to turn my house into a complete disaster? Erwin stood frozen at first, but as the sight grew more chaotic, his face quickly turned pale with fear. He hurried to say, I'm sorry. I'll clean everything up right now. Almost instantly, a gentle breeze swept through, and the room returned to its neat state as if nothing had happened. Erwin sat down on the bed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with an awkward smile. He thought back to her words about being skilled at cleaning, but he had never imagined she could do it with such speed. Just then, John Janden congratulated her for successfully forming a contract with a spirit. Hearing that, Erwin's nervous expression shifted into a cheerful grin as he scratched his head and thanked him. But John Janden continued, saying, "You don't need to spend your time coming here. Wouldn't it be better to use your time wisely before heading back into the labyrinth?" Erwin nodded, admitting that was true, but the girl lowered her gaze and whispered, "I ran here because I wanted you to be the very first person to know." John Janden paused at her words, realizing she must have seen him as her very first companion. She seemed unusually attached to him, and for a moment, he found himself lost in thought. He thought back to the way she acted whenever she was beside him and reminded himself that it would be better to keep this relationship strictly professional. Yet, John Janden suddenly spoke with quiet resolve, saying that he intended to stay here for good, so if she ever needed help, she could always find him. He also made it clear he still wanted to remain friends with Erwin, because to him they were more than acquaintances, they were comrades in arms. Hearing this, her eyes grew moist, touched by his words. Through her tears, Erwin whispered with joy that she was happy to hear it and that having bonds like these was something precious. From then on, there were still 26 days left before John Janden had to return to Mekong. Depending on how one saw it, that could either be a long stretch or a fleeting moment. But for him, the important thing was knowing how to make good use of it. Not long after, he found himself standing in front of another communal building, wondering if this was the infamous Bull Tavern where the demon folk were said to stay. Just as the thought crossed his mind, one of them turned around and spotted him. The air shifted as voices rang out, identifying him. Wasn't this the strongest warrior himself, John Janden? The reaction spread like wildfire, and the place buzzed as though the roof were about to lift away. Everyone had heard countless tales of his feats, and now seeing him in person was almost too much for them. To keep his head clear, he quickly cast a spell to block out the overwhelming noise. Even so, he was soon ushered into the inn. Someone asked curiously why a man like him had come there. Did he plan on staying? After thinking it over, he decided it might not be such a bad idea. The price was only 300 spirit stones a night, far cheaper than he would have imagined. The man in charge began explaining the rules to John Janden. He pointed out where the sleeping arrangements were, mentioning that John would even be given his own bed. That detail caught John off guard. So that was the reason the place was so cheap? He immediately shook his head and declined. John wasn't here for a bed. His goal was different, he had come to meet Aina, the second daughter of Fenelon. Almost as if on cue, Aina appeared nearby. Someone quickly called out to her, saying that John, the son of Janden, had come specifically looking for her. She walked over with a calm but questioning look and asked why he was there. John didn't hesitate. He wanted to ask a favor. His request was simple but bold, he wanted to fight her. At first, Aina assumed he meant it as training and asked if that was the case. John didn't deny it. He knew relying only on close combat skills wouldn't be enough to survive, and sparring with her might push him further. Aina gave a short laugh and told him he didn't need to make such a formal request. If he wanted to fight, all he had to do was step outside. The courtyard, however, was already crowded with others in the middle of their own drills. Realizing the situation, she added that as long as it wasn't in the early morning, she'd be willing to fight him anytime. John immediately seized the chance and asked to begin right then. The two of them soon faced each other, ready for battle. One raised a shield, the other gripped a sword, and the tension in the air promised a real clash. Aina and John were about to face off. He came with the intention of learning from her, but he had no plan to lose. The moment the signal to begin was given, John Janden rushed straight at her, striking forward with all his might. Yet only moments later, he was sprawled across the ground, blood trickling from his nose, completely overwhelmed. The onlookers gasped in awe. Aina truly lived up to her title as the strongest, the most extraordinary warrior. Holding her sword at her side, she glanced at him and asked if he was all right. John gave a faint nod, assuring her that he was fine. He admitted she was incredibly skilled, and said this was the best way he could spend his time. Wiping the blood from his nose, he insisted once again that he wanted to keep going. and so, they clashed again and again. No matter how hard he tried, she continued to dominate the fight. He pushed himself relentlessly, training with Aina over and over. By the time night fell, his body was exhausted, one knee pressed against the ground as he struggled to catch his breath. Aina looked at him and asked if he really intended to continue, admitting that she herself was ready to rest. Gazing up at her, John felt the weight of her overwhelming strength and finally admitted that he had reached his limit. She smiled faintly, praised him for his effort, and they each returned to their rooms. But there was something more about Aina. Unlike most demons, she was sharper, far more intelligent, and he felt certain she would never betray him. Curious, he asked if she planned to enter Mekong alone the next time. She answered softly that she likely would, since she did not have the money to form a team. Seizing the chance, John stretched out his hand toward her and asked if she would join forces with him. Aina froze in surprise, staring at his hand as he added that he would take 80% of the profit, but he would cover all the expenses for the team. Aina's expression suddenly changed and she raised her hand to stop him. That's enough, no more explanations are needed. John Janden froze for a moment, worried that she disliked the terms he had just mentioned. He quickly added, "Listen, I'll even pay for the equipment myself if that helps." But before he could say more, her hand gently closed around his. She told him that even if he tried to explain further, she still wouldn't understand everything. What mattered was that she trusted him. Hearing those words, John Janden clasped her hand in return. It was no longer just a handshake but a bond between comrades. "I look forward to working with you," he said with a faint smile. For the first time, he felt like he had gained a true companion. The next day, Aina and John Janden made their way to the tribal shrine to meet the old priest. When he saw them arrive, the elder greeted them warmly. "Welcome, Aina, second daughter of Fenelon, and John Janden, son of Jan Denver." Yet deep down, John Janden felt uneasy. He had not come here for this man, but he had no other choice. The elder's voice carried a tone of curiosity. "It is rare for a warrior who once left the shrine to return. Have you come, like Aina, to study reading and writing?" John Janden shook his head and replied honestly, "No." That puzzled the old man. "Then why have you come here?" With determination in his eyes, John Janden declared, "I want the spirit seal. More precisely, the death spirit seal." He knew better than anyone how crucial this power was. Without it, conquering the labyrinth would be nearly impossible. Every race in this world carried its own unique gift. The elves were able to commune with spirits and draw upon their strength, while the dwarves bore the blessing of armor, which magnified the power of their crafted items. The beastmen were said to forge contracts with ancient creatures known as spirit beasts. Meanwhile, the warrior clan held the mysterious mark called the spirit seal. A man stepped out from the shadows, his voice deep and cold. "So, how could you possibly know about that? It is not something a young warrior like you should be aware of." The warrior pressed his lips together, thinking to himself. "Once again, they suspect me. But that is fine. After all, this was the very reason I searched through the library for records about the spirit seal." John Janden furrowed his brows and calmly explained. "I came across it in an old book. From what I read, the seal plays a decisive role in the war against the elves." The man burst out laughing and slapped him on the back. "So that is how you learned of it, through reading. Interesting." His face shifted into a broad, approving smile. "I am proud of both you and Aina. Naturally, we would never turn away a warrior who seeks the spirit seal." John was about to speak further, but the man clenched his fist and interrupted with a firm tone. "However, young warrior, one seal will cost you no less than 800,000 spirit stones. Can you truly afford it?" The dark figure responded with unshaken resolve. "I will pay the full price." At his side, Aina widened her eyes in shock. "Are you serious?" she thought. Indeed, that was the very reason why so few could obtain it early in the game. The cost alone was staggering, and at later stages, rare materials would become even more valuable than gold itself. "But I have money, don't I?" John Dan reached into his cloak and pulled out a pouch of crystals. Inside were 500,000 in one bag, and 3 smaller bags each worth 100,000. The man before him widened his eyes, clearly shocked at the sight. John, son of Jan Dan, where could you possibly have gotten such wealth? John gave a calm, confident smile. He had already prepared an excuse for this exact moment. I would have been disappointed if you hadn't asked, he replied. Then he leaned back slightly, beginning his tale. It happened back on the very first floor. I came across an elf who was badly wounded. The moment she saw me, her face was filled with fear. Of course, I took advantage of that. I forced her into servitude and drained every bit of value I could. In the end, her sister paid me a ransom just to get her back. A cruel laugh escaped his lips. Those elves are so pitiful, so weak. Pathetic creatures. The man opposite him suddenly burst out laughing, his face glowing with delight. I can't even remember the last time I laughed this hard, he admitted. Around them, the crowd began to murmur with admiration. Well done, son of Jan Dan, someone called. You've humiliated those wretched long-eared cowards, another praised. You might be the first to ever pull it off. Incredible. John glanced around at the voices surrounding him. Everyone seemed drawn in, their hatred for the elves burning openly. He thought to himself that this wasn't so bad after all. The man grinned, then handed him an item as a reward. This is my gift to you, for showing me your true potential. John Jan Dan froze for a moment, stunned as he looked at what had just been handed to him. His mind raced. Was this man really giving him back 200,000 stones? Just like that? A laugh almost escaped his lips, 200,000 stones earned from a single story. What kind of generosity was this? Overcome with excitement, he raised his hand and let out a triumphant laugh. I'll keep crushing those long-eared pests beneath my feet and forge myself into an even greater warrior. His chest swelled with pride, and yet, a strange warmth crept into his thoughts. He found himself admitting quietly, these people are beginning to grow on me. They're far more captivating than I ever expected. The spirit mark, an ancient art of empowerment. It worked by absorbing the essence of magical materials and shaping it into a force beyond ordinary strength. Among the Kwangdi, the tattoos they bore from birth stood as proof that their souls remained pure. Those markings never faded, not even as they matured. And so, every single Kwang carried such a mark across their skin. The man before him lifted his hand with an unsettling calm. I'll grant you one last chance to reconsider. Once you choose this path, you will never again be able to claim another spirit mark. John Jan Dan sat cross-legged within the circle, his face set with unwavering determination. That doesn't matter. A high-grade spirit mark, the immortal seal, is everything a frontline shield warrior could ever need. The man raised a slender needle, holding it delicately between his fingers. Then so be it. Let us begin. John Jan Dan did not flinch. His skills were already formidable, but this choice was clear. For any seasoned player of the game, walking the path of immortality was not a gamble, it was the only answer. As beams of light pierced into his back, his brows furrowed in pain. He clenched his teeth, his expression twisted as a sharp thought ran through his mind. Was he really going to endure this agony every time he leveled up? The pain was almost unbearable. A guttural shout burst from his throat, and in that instant, a glowing message appeared before him. You have unlocked the first seal of immortality. Natural recovery has been greatly enhanced. Strength has increased by 13. His fingers dug into the cloak draped across his back as his muscles burned and throbbed. He turned his head slightly, gasping for air, only to hear a man chuckling softly. Confused, he wondered why anyone would laugh at such a moment. The man, however, continued smiling, his voice calm yet admiring. It is rare to witness a true warrior express gratitude toward a priest. Startled, he panicked, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He bolted away, heart racing, muttering to himself. Did I do something wrong? I need to get out of here before he starts questioning me. Darkness gave way to the first light of dawn, and by morning, he had already made his way to the trading district. The bustling marketplace overflowed with voices, merchants calling out their wares, and the clamor of buyers haggling over prices. It was here that he planned to gather the equipment he needed. His recent training with Aina had taught him one thing with absolute clarity. He was not cut out to be a swordsman. Pursuing swordsmanship any further would only waste valuable time. Once he acquired a soul seal, his path would focus solely on mastering shield techniques. That was where his true strength lay. John Janden entered a weapon shop, greeted warmly by the shopkeeper, who proudly displayed rows of polished weapons, each one gleaming under the morning sun. "Welcome, what would you like to buy?" asked the shopkeeper. The young man glanced around the store before answering, "I'm looking for a one-handed weapon." Hearing this, the shopkeeper raised his hand toward the display and said, "From here to here, these are all heavy weapons favored by seasoned gatekeepers." The man studied the section carefully, noting how each weapon seemed perfectly suited for warriors who thrived on raw power. Yet after some thought, he shook his head. "I want something simpler." He reasoned that while these weapons dealt tremendous damage, such force wasn't really needed to clear the early floors of the dungeon, where most monsters could be taken down without much effort. The shopkeeper, understanding his request, quickly presented a more modest choice. "How about this mace?" The man lifted it, tested its weight, and gave a satisfied nod. "I'll take it." It was a spiked mace, not too large, priced at 220,000 stones. As soon as the purchase was made, a notification appeared, "The character has equipped a spiked mace. Total equipment level increased by 85. He didn't stop there. Since the helmets available in the store didn't quite fit his head, he ordered one made to measure for 170,000 stones. Then he chose a chest plate that fit snugly against his frame, costing another 360,000. More messages appeared one after another. The character has equipped a cheap helmet. Total equipment level increased by 47. The character has equipped a slightly reinforced chest plate. Total equipment level increased by 57. With that, his shopping was complete. After spending nearly all his money, he still had 50,000 stones left. By the time he left the labyrinth behind, quite a while had passed, and his daily routine had naturally fallen into place. At around 7 in the morning, he would wake up and share breakfast with Erwin. As he chewed on a piece of meat, he frowned in confusion. Wasn't the library quite far from here? Erwin laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of her head. It's because the food here is cheap and really tasty. I stayed at the library reading until 4 in the afternoon. John Janden glanced at the girl he had seen dozing off in the library earlier. She was asleep again. Later, Erwin had gone to a place she had never visited before to grab some information that wasn't available in the library. Sitting down at the table, she ate while subtly observing the environment. At a nearby table, 3 men were arguing passionately about a dangerous-looking monster. John Janden furrowed his brows as he ate, thinking that the place was a bit pricey and the food wasn't particularly good. By around 5 in the evening, he headed to the training grounds where other warriors lived. In the yard, he showcased his strength and managed to take down an opponent during practice. By the 7th day of training, he began sparring with more warriors. Despite the fatigue showing on his face, he was still eager and committed to improving. The training here didn't have a formal combat skill system like he had hoped, but relying purely on instinct proved to be excellent practice. Notifications kept appearing. Repeated practice has increased your reflexes. Continuous training has improved your mobility. Continuous training has enhanced your vision. Attack stat increased by 1. Through consistent effort, he even managed to defeat Aina a few times during sparring matches, gaining a newfound sense of confidence. The cheers of the spectators filled the arena below as they watched John and Aina's match. "Son of Janden. John has won," they shouted. John placed his hand over Aina's in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for today," he said, while the crowd's excitement continued to echo around them. "The strongest warrior, John." Sweat dripped down Aina's face, not from exhaustion but from admiration. "You've gotten stronger, John," she admitted. She was incredibly skilled, but her fighting style had a quirky charm. John had pointed it out to her before, yet it had become a habit she seemed unwilling, or unable, to change. By 9 o'clock, John returned home to take a shower, only to be surprised when Erwin showed up again. "Isn't it exhausting to come all the way here every time?" "It takes at least an hour," he said, perplexed. Erwin smiled softly, a playful tone in her voice. "It's fine. Come on, let's go have dinner." Around 11, after they finished dinner, Erwin headed back to her place. She waved goodbye and said, "I'm off now. Sleep well." Then she gripped his hand firmly, a determined smile on her face. "Good luck with the labyrinth tomorrow." John smiled and sighed, thinking to himself, tomorrow's the day already? Time really does fly. He responded, "You too." After repeating this routine day after day, a month passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Now, only 24 hours remained before the labyrinth opened again. Another notification popped up on John Janden's screen, displaying his stats. Level 1, Physical 66 plus 41, Mental 37, Agility 1, Skill Level 218 plus 146, Combat Power 158.50 plus 77.5. The numbers reflected the growth he had achieved so far. At 8:10, the Explorers Guild opened its doors. Many adventurers had already joined the guild, bustling about inside the main hall. John Janden and Aina stepped forward, approaching the reception desk with a serious expression. "We'd like to use the magical positioning system," John said firmly. The receptionist looked confused. "Just the two of you?" John placed his hand on the desk and nodded. "Yes. Please put your hands on the orb." He placed both hands on the glowing blue orb. As soon as he made contact, it shone brightly. The receptionist studied the light carefully and then calculated the cost. "For 2 full-rank adventurers, the fee is 15,000 A, she said. The price was steep for a single use, but clearly essential for their purpose. Aina's eyes widened in surprise. 15,000? For this? John explained. Normally, you start in random locations in the labyrinth, but with the magical positioning system, we can start together. Curious, he asked the receptionist another question. How is an adventurer's rank determined? The receptionist responded seriously. We base it on the energy contained within the adventurer's soul. After hearing the explanation, John's mind raced with new questions, eager to understand every detail about how the system worked. So the cost will go up if my rank is higher, right? John asked. The receptionist nodded firmly. Of course. But keep in mind, the effect only lasts 24 hours from now, so plan accordingly. John stayed silent for a moment, absorbing the information. His eyes then widened when he noticed the food laid out on the table. Aina's gaze sparkled with curiosity as she asked, trembling slightly, what are all these? I ordered the most expensive feast from the tavern, 800A, as a celebration before we enter the labyrinth, John explained, gesturing toward the spread. Aina's eyes lit up, her face filled with delight. This isn't real, is it? She whispered, hardly believing her eyes. John didn't let her wait and encouraged her. Go ahead, try it. Aina eagerly bit into the meat, savoring every bite. It's amazing. This feels like a dream, she exclaimed, devouring the dishes as if she'd never eaten before. Determined, she added, from now on, I'll work hard. I'll earn enough money to eat like this again. John was taken aback by her appetite and speed but couldn't help but cheer her on. Absolutely. Good luck, he said, smiling to himself. He wondered silently, what does she normally eat to have this much energy? 10 minutes before the labyrinth opened, a crowd of adventurers had already gathered at the entrance. A loud voice rang out, warning them, no one may enter yet. John Janden gazed at the labyrinth gate in awe. He hadn't paid much attention last time, caught up in the rush, but now he realized just how massive it truly was. His thoughts were cut off by a shout. A man, already standing in front of the gate, waved excitedly and called out, "Stop! I can see the gate. We've arrived." The crowd around them buzzed with excitement. "It's Pat Hun. We made it on time," someone exclaimed. "Pat Hun is a formidable warrior," another added. John Jandan observed the newcomers, smiling faintly to himself. They must have just completed their initiation rituals. How could they always manage to reach the gate so promptly? The group was still animated, basking in their triumph. Aina's gaze softened as memories flickered through her mind. "It reminds me of those days," she murmured. John, standing beside her, looked at her expressionless face and thought, "It's only been a few months for us, yet it feels like a lifetime." A voice snapped him back to the present. "Everyone may enter now." Suddenly, the massive gate radiated a vibrant purple light, capturing the attention of all the gathered adventurers. Aina, brimming with excitement, reached for John Jandan's hand. "Let's go, John." He shook his head firmly. "Wait, Aina. Don't rush in yet." Not wanting to keep her waiting, he added quickly, "There are a few things I need to check. I read that stepping into an unstable dimension can be risky." Before he could finish, Aina grinned, eyes sparkling. "Don't worry, John. I probably wouldn't understand half of what you're saying anyway, so I'll follow your lead." Suddenly, he spoke up. "Only 1 minute left before the gate closes." Aina froze, disbelief written across her face. "But, shouldn't we go in now?" John Jandan stared intently at the labyrinth gate, noting how it seemed smaller than when it first opened. He estimated its size compared to last time. "We'll enter now," he said, his thoughts focused on timing. Just then, a guard's voice rang out, announcing that the gate would soon shut. He glanced at Aina and gave her a quick nod. "Move now." "All right," she replied, following him without hesitation. The guard panicked, shouting, "Wait! It's dangerous." John Jandan led the way, everything around them swallowed by darkness. A single drop of water fell onto his hat. He opened his eyes with determination. "I knew it," he thought. Aina clutched his arm nervously. "I can't see a thing, John." He moved ahead, patting his pockets for reassurance. "Stay calm, Aina. Everything will be fine." The area was shrouded in shadows, so he pulled out a torch from his bag and lit it. The warm glow cut through the darkness. Aina gasped at the sudden light. Before she could even speak, her eyes widened at what appeared ahead. "What is that, John?" He allowed himself a small smile. Just as he had suspected, it was still there. Emerging from the darkness was a memorial pedestal, standing silently in the gloom. He frowned briefly but smiled as he explained, "This is a memorial pedestal. We can use it to open the gate to the second level. We're going up now." A glint of excitement flashed in his eyes. Any skilled gamer would know how to make the most of an opportunity like this. John Jandan reached out, and a streak of pale blue light shot upward. The gate materialized right before them. Aina's eyes widened in astonishment. He grinned and said, "Let's go." The system announced, "You are the first to advance from level 1 to level 2. Experience gained, 2, character leveled up. Maximum essence capacity increased by 1. As they stepped forward, the dark ground sank slightly under their weight. The stone architecture crumbled behind them, leaving only remnants. Aina, still in shock, asked as they moved, "How did you manage this?" The chief said it would take days just to reach level 2. John Jandan, torch in hand, looked around calmly and replied, "The book said it could be done this way." Aina's disbelief lingered. "Wow, that's incredible. Though now, there's hardly anything left of this place." Despite faint groans echoing in the ruins, the area had officially become a dead zone. John didn't look at Aina but asked, "You can feel it too, right?" Before she could fully process what he meant, he added, "I feel it coursing through my veins, spreading through my entire body." Now Aina understood. She whispered, "Yes. So that means your soul state has been upgraded." Congratulations, he thought to himself. Soul state, huh? So it really improved without having to defeat any monsters. Dungeons and stones also have their own levels. A player's vitality is consumed when using skills, and it increases with each level. The amount of essence a player can use at once grows as well. Now, being at level 2, I can channel 2 units of essence simultaneously. Anna added, it's strange though, your soul state leveled up without having to fight any monsters. He turned to look at her, intrigued. John believed that reaching a new floor ahead of everyone else was already an achievement in itself. That was exactly why he pushed forward, he understood the hidden value behind it. In this world, experience was tied to achievements, yet each monster only granted such rewards once. As adventurers progressed, collecting achievements became increasingly difficult, like hitting an invisible wall. But there was a secret way to break through that barrier, being the very first to step onto the next floor as quickly as possible. Unlike monsters, the experience gained from that feat was limitless. If used wisely, it could be a shortcut to rapid growth. A sly smile spread across John's face. He knew this trick had to remain hidden. If others discovered it, the advantage would vanish. Turning to Aina, he said quietly, keep this between us. If anyone asks, just tell them it took us several days to reach the second floor. Although Aina didn't fully grasp his reasoning, she nodded without hesitation. That was enough for John. Good, she won't expose the truth, he thought. Experienced adventurers would eventually arrive here, and when they did, they'd question anyone who looked inexperienced. Best to appear clueless and stay out of their attention. The night sky echoed with the sound of wings as flocks of birds scattered into the darkness. Outwardly, John said in a calm voice, let's move out, Aina. Inwardly, however, his thoughts were far less steady. He feared those adventurers more than the monsters themselves. With a firm motion, he fastened a torch to his helmet, securing it tightly with a strip of rope. I call it the torch mode. Many adventurers have already relied on this trick, yet to me it still feels somewhat unnatural. Aina glanced at me, then gave a cheerful smile and tapped the top of my helmet. Looks good on you, she teased. Not too hot, is it? John replied calmly, of course not. These are no ordinary torches. They're enchanted. Once activated, they burn endlessly through the day, a reliable tool in places like this. The dead zone is tougher than the goblin forest, filled with stronger monsters. Still, unlike the forest, it has no hidden traps, which makes it less tricky to navigate. In short, it is a battlefield where 2 warriors like us can truly put our strength to use. Suddenly, Aina's eyes narrowed. Her voice rang sharp. Ghouls, John. Ahead of us, starving creatures staggered forward, their hungry gaze locked on our flesh. It was only the first day, so 3 of them appeared. By the 3rd day, their numbers would multiply dangerously. While John was still weighing the situation, Aina's excitement burst forth. Her hand tightened around her sword. I've been restless from sitting idle too long. Time to stretch my arms. With that, she dashed straight at the ghouls. Her blade sliced through the air, swift and merciless, and within seconds the monsters lay in pieces. Blood sprayed across her face, but her expression only grew more thrilled. Too easy. If the second floor is like this, it'll be nothing to worry about. But before Aina could bask in her little victory, a piercing shriek echoed through the cavern. Her face turned pale, and she clung tightly to John Janden, trembling like a frightened child. That scream, what was that? The sound alone made her skin crawl. John gave her a side glance, half exasperated, half amused. She had the build of a warrior yet the heart of a rabbit. With a sigh, he answered kindly, those are banshees, spirits of vengeance. They rarely attack first. As long as we don't provoke them, we'll be fine. Aina's voice shook as if she was on the verge of tears. I understand. But are you certain we don't need to kill them? They won't harm us later, right? Calm as ever, John pressed forward, speaking steadily. Our attacks wouldn't do much against them anyway. Worse still, if we strike first, they'll curse us. Their wails will haunt us until we leave this labyrinth. What? Haunt us? Aina nearly collapsed from fear. She shouted, frustrated with herself, "That's awful. But I suppose it's lucky I chose to follow you. You're smarter than I thought." Before John could respond, another noise stirred the silence. Aina flinched again. "John, what was that?" This time she practically leapt onto him, wrapping her arms so tightly around his neck that he almost choked. "Aina, let go, you'll kill me before the monsters do. Look, skeleton soldiers." As soon as the skeletal warriors emerged from the shadows, Aina's fear flipped into eagerness. Her eyes lit up. Skeletons? That's it? She snatched up her sword, grinning like a predator. Perfect. I'll deal with them myself. With a fierce laugh, she charged in, hacking away with wild enthusiasm. The skeletal minions never stood a chance. Bones shattered under her blows, scattering across the stone floor. Still rubbing his sore neck, John muttered, "Aim for their weak points, Aina." She turned mid-swing and shouted back, "What did you say?" Caught off guard, John froze, sweat dripping down his temple. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'll just keep my mouth shut next time." The system chimed, announcing that I had taken down a skeletal soldier and gained a single point of experience. From there, we marched north for about an hour. As expected, the further we went, the stranger the creatures became. We ran into fully grown ghouls, towering twice the size of the lesser ones I had fought before. There were mutated skeletons, some turned into hulking warriors, others into archers firing from a distance. Fortunately, their threat level was still fairly low. On that first day, only a handful crossed our path, giving me a chance to sharpen my combat skills bit by bit. I quickly realized that the staff suited me far better than dual axes. Its weight and length were perfect in my hands, and cracking skulls became easier with every swing. My armor also proved its worth. It was shaped like a vest but stripped down in design, leaving room for me to use a shield more effectively in battle. While I was still mulling over these adjustments, an arrow whistled through the air. One of the skeleton archers had taken aim at me. The helmet might not have been flawless, but it was enough. The arrow struck and clattered harmlessly off the steel before dropping to the ground. Without hesitation, I rushed forward and smashed the archer to pieces. Stronger than before, sharper than ever, that was the thought running through my mind. Destroying enemies came naturally to me, but I couldn't ignore one truth: somewhere out there was another demonic being who could do it just as well. John's eyes shifted toward Aina. She was shouting Valhalla at the top of her lungs while cutting through waves of skeletal soldiers. Her sword moved with a ruthless rhythm, swirling like a storm, and the bone warriors shattered before her in an instant. John Janden couldn't help but wonder, wasn't Valhalla the primeval goddess of the demon folk? Either way, her way of fighting was both fierce and fascinating. At first, he couldn't understand why she kept yelling that word in the heat of battle. But when a skeletal soldier lunged at his side, John instinctively raised his fist and smashed it with a thunderous blow, shouting Valhalla himself. The moment was almost comical, so it was just a battle cry after all. Still, it was something new, different from the wars he once fought alongside Erwin. Perhaps this was what the feast of the demon folk truly meant. Now they fought shoulder to shoulder, blades and fists moving as one. The system's cold notifications echoed in his mind. You have slain a mature ghoul. Experience gained, 1. You have defeated a skeletal warrior. Experience gained, 1. You have taken down a skeletal archer. Experience gained, 1. Anna's voice cut in suddenly. Your arm is injured. Startled, John looked down, but replied calmly, it'll heal soon. The wound is already closing. Anna's eyes widened with excitement. It's completely sealed. That must be the death mark, isn't it? He gave a faint grunt of acknowledgement. The death mark was etched on his back, hidden beneath layers of armor. Its effect was far beyond natural recovery, able to seal even a half-centimeter deep wound within minutes. Beyond that, the life essence within him could regenerate on its own, hardening his endurance. The only catch was the agony of the process, and even then, success was never guaranteed. John Janden bent down and touched the ground. It was no longer damp, and even the terrain had shifted. The roars of the Bensi grew louder, echoing so fiercely that his ears rang. Through the deafening chaos, he turned to Aina and said, "Get ready." The cries of the beasts sent flocks of birds bursting out of the canopy. From deep beyond the mountains, something far greater was stirring. A level 8 monster was about to make its entrance. Then came a strange sound, unlike anything before. Aina froze, her face drained of color, tears trembling in her eyes. "What was that, John?" she whispered. He clenched his jaw, listening to the overwhelming noise. "The call of the damned," he answered. "Take your position, Aina." And then it appeared. A figure like death itself, a three-eyed monster stepping out from the shadows. John had heard rumors that it devoured the very light of the labyrinth, but seeing it in person sent a chill deeper than any tale. Its presence was far more terrifying than he imagined. "Remember, aim for the head," he warned urgently. "Any other strike will be useless." Aina, still shaken, wiped her tears and nodded firmly. "All right, I trust you." The creature roared, its body shrouded in violet light, before charging at them with savage force. Aina met its blow, her blade clashing against the crushing strength of its claw-like arm. At the same moment, John circled behind, driving his weapon into its back. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath. It was like stabbing into stone. The monster howled and slammed its massive fist into the earth. John leapt aside just in time as the ground beneath his feet cracked and caved in. From the fractures, glowing veins of light shot forward, forcing him on the defensive. Its strength was overwhelming, yet he had managed one thing: it was now focused entirely on him. Aina sprang into the air, her blade flashing as it swept toward the monster's head. She missed, landing only a strike across the creature's shoulder. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Even that hit barely scratched it. The blade had bitten into its flesh, but not enough to matter. The wound closed almost instantly. The Reaper turned its burning gaze on her. With a thunderous roar, it swung its clawed arm, sending her flying across the battlefield. She crashed hard and had to jam her greatsword into the ground just to stop herself from being hurled further. Breathing heavily, she called out, "John, this thing is no joke. I thought a strong defense was all it had, but this is worse than I expected." Her ultimate sword technique had barely seared the monster, and even that small burn had healed in seconds. This was the Reaper's supreme defense, its body fortified by a shield of dark power. It howled again, its aura flaring violently. Then came something new. "Damn it, it's changing," John muttered as the ground began to quake. From the soil, countless hands clawed their way to the surface. Aina's face drained of color as she realized what they were. "John, what is that?" she shouted. "Summoning," he replied grimly. "The Reaper's call of the dead." Dozens of ravenous ghouls dragged themselves free, their shrieks joining the monsters in a chorus of death. The Reaper charged forward, leading the swarm. John's mind raced. This was going to be far harder than he thought. "Aina," he roared, "take down the ghouls first. Leave the Reaper to me." The two stood back to back, bracing themselves as the horde descended. If you think this video is insanely awesome, don't forget to like and subscribe, and turn on the bell to catch all the latest updates.